Well, hey everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to the first live stream I've done in about a year and a half. And I plan on trying to do this about once a week, hence the name Outbreak News this week. And what I want to do is I want to kind of look at not necessarily the top stories. I know I put that in as a subtitle, but some of the stories which I think are the most interesting, and hopefully you feel the same way. And I want to go ahead and start out with one out of California. And that is actually one of the most interesting parasites, but it's also an incredibly tragic, destructive parasite. And that's Naegleria fowleri, or what the media frequently calls it, the brain-eating amoeba. And this was last Wednesday. And this came out of Tehama County in Northern California, somewhere in between San Francisco and the Oregon border. And this is what they had to say. Tehama County Health Services Agency Public Health has learned that a Tehama County resident less than 10 years of age has been diagnosed with an extremely rare infection known as primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, or PAM. Testing performed by the Department of Health in California and specialty labs were positive for evidence of Naegleria fowleri, the amoeba that's responsible for PAM. Now, health officials say the most likely source of the infection for this child was swimming in a freshwater lake in the county, but they don't specify which lake. And PAM, primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, is really rare. And in California, they've seen about 10 cases since it's first been seen in the United States. The first cases were identified in 1962. And between 1962 and 2019, there was about 150 cases, somewhere in that ballpark. Just to give you some more information about it, it is transmitted through fresh water, so lakes and rivers and other types of fresh water. And you can't get it via swallowing it. It has to rush up your nose. So it typically, at least in the US, it typically happens while swimming or diving or other kinds of water sports that are done on the lake. And what happens is the amoeba gets rushed up the nose. It follows the olfactory nerve and finds its way to the brain, and hence the nickname brain-eating amoeba. It starts to destroy brain tissue. It's good thing is it doesn't spread from person to person. Anyway, so that's actually a pretty sad case in California. I'm not sure, are you familiar with this organism or not? I know on the website, outbreaknewstoday.com, I've reported on at least 5 cases out of Karachi, Pakistan. Now, while and Karachi sees about a dozen a year now for the past several years, so they're seeing quite a bit. In the U.S., it is typically through recreational water. But in Pakistan, a lot of it is via ablution, which is nasal rinsing. And I know from reading articles out of Pakistan that there's a lot of issues with not enough chlorination of the public water, and that's likely where the parasite is coming from. Anyway, so what do we need to know as far as prevention? Prevention is actually kind of obvious, right? The only certain positive way to avoid it is via staying away from fresh water, right? You got to stay away from swimming and doing other freshwater related activities. Swimming in swimming pools instead of these untreated bodies of water. However, there has been cases in some countries where people got it through a very filthy, untreated, untaken care of swimming pool. So you got to make sure that the swimming pool is properly maintained. Using nose clips. A lot of the advocacy groups, these are parents that lost children to Naegleria, would start advocacy groups, and a lot of them recommend nose clips and other stuff like that if you want to partake in freshwater activities. You can avoid putting your water or your head underwater. It's important in places like hot springs too, in which the water temperature, is really nice and warm all the time. And this is where this amoeba is most viable and active. So those are some things that you can do to avoid the parasite. Very dangerous. I said there was from 1962 to what year? 2019. There was 148 reported to the CDC, and I think 4 people survived, and several of them were since 2013. And that's, of course, thank you to the new treatment options. The miltefosine is one example. Miltefosine is actually a drug that's approved for another parasite called leishmaniasis. But it's been used as a treatment for some of the free-living amoebas like Naegleria, like Balamuthia, and like Acanthamoeba. So we do have those options out there. But and there was also some of I spoke to one of the doctors that treated one of the survivors here in Orlando, Florida, and part of the treatment regimen was also cooling the body down a lot. They cooled it down quite a bit to slow down the body functions and the brain function. So anyway, so that's interesting story out of California, and I keep pretty good track of this stuff, and I think this is the first case in the United States this year. I could be wrong. I can't be 100% sure, but I think it is. Okay. Anybody got any stories or any kind of history or anything with Naegleria fowleri? I have. If you're a microbiologist or somebody that's really into infectious diseases, you kind of do have your favorites, right? It's a weird thing, but it's true. And Naegleria is clearly one of my favorites. And in 2019, I was pretty excited. I got invited to the Amoeba Summit in Orlando and got to interview quite a few of the experts concerning this parasite. So that was a lot of fun. Let me go ahead and move on to another story, which I found pretty interesting, and probably most of you had heard this already, but it's an important story, and it's concerning Marburg virus. Yeah, this is Ebola's cousin. And it was very interesting to see this pop up because I don't think there's been a Marburg virus case since 2017 when Uganda had their last outbreak. So it's been, not, it's just rearing its ugly head now. But fortunately, it does appear that could change, but it does appear that Guinea may have this contained to the one person. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the World Health Organization release and take a look at some of the things they had to say. They say health authorities in Guinea today confirmed a case of Marburg virus disease in southern Gwekido Prefecture. Forgive me if I butchered that. And this is the first time Marburg, a highly infectious disease that causes hemorrhagic fever, right? It's one of the filoviruses, Of the filoviruses, there's 6 strains of Ebola, and 4 of them are pathogenic to humans. Then there's Marburg, and I think there's another one called virus. Don't know much about it, but I think that's been reported out of Spain. I might be wrong on that, but that's what I remember reading in the past. Anyway, the thing that's really important about this is the first time that Marburg has been found in West Africa. Yeah, all right. Well, remember 2014 or late 2013, early 2014. That was the first time that we saw Ebola virus in West Africa. So, yeah, a lot of One Health related topics going on in West Africa. Marburg, like I said, is already is in the same family as Ebola. And it's interesting, it was detected in the same place where 2 months ago, the end of the Ebola outbreak in Guinea was declared. I mean, so where that outbreak started was in the same prefecture, which is very close to Sierra Leone and Liberia, right around that border. And I believe that was the same place where we first started seeing Ebola virus disease back in the big outbreak back in 2014 and 2016. Anyway, so they say, of course, contact tracing is really an important function when it comes to these filoviruses, these hemorrhagic fevers. And it says that efforts are underway to find people who may have been in contact with the patient. The patient had died, if I didn't already mention that. And I did see a report that they contacted about 155 people and they found at least 4 contacts of this patient. So right now they're all asymptomatic, but of course they're going to be monitoring them for a little bit. So, and it's starting to storm right on time in this part of Florida. So let me go ahead and show you about the outbreaks. And there hasn't been a lot of Marburg outbreaks, but the history is kind of cool. I'm dealing with new software here, so be patient with me. Okay, hopefully you can see that. All right, let me put it in large screen so you can see it better. All right, so actually Marburg was quote unquote discovered before Ebola was, almost by a decade. And the first outbreak was actually in Europe. These were among laboratory workers handling African green monkeys imported from Uganda. About 31 cases occurred and there were 7 fatalities. But this is where the disease got its name, from Marburg, Germany. And it was also simultaneously detected in an outbreak in the former Yugoslavia, which I believe is Serbia now. And then you didn't see anything about it for, till 1975. And you would see some outbreaks in Kenya. Uganda's seen the most. I think Uganda's had 5 outbreaks. Uganda has a lot of experience with hemorrhagic fever outbreaks, and they've become actually pretty good at containing them, with all the experience, right? They're doing a really good job. The worst outbreak was in Angola in 2004, 2005. They had 252 cases and 227 people died. And that's a 90% case fatality rate. So that was clearly the worst one. And 2017, there was one in Uganda. There's also, other than Marburg, Germany, and Serbia, there's other laboratory cases. We see a case that happened in Russia in 1990, and that was a laboratory contamination case. So, yeah, anyway, so it's about a dozen outbreaks since 1967. And I think one of the more interesting things about this coming up at this time is it couldn't have been about 2 years ago. I interviewed a individual from UC Davis, and she was one of the people that discovered Marburg virus in bats in Sierra Leone. And that was the first time the virus has ever been found in Western Africa. And here we are 1.5, 2 years later, and there's a human infection in Guinea. And if you want, you can always check out that interview. It's on YouTube. It's Marburg virus in bats from Sierra Leone. I think that might be the title of it, but it's a very good interview, and I encourage you to check it out if you're interested in Marburg virus. Okay, let's go ahead and see if we got any comments. Yeah, Earl says filovirus is bad. Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. They certainly are, and as you see with Ebola, as you see with Marburg, the case fatality rates can get up to 90%, 9 out of 10 people. So, yeah, pretty devastating type disease. Let's see what I got next on the agenda. And yeah, let me do this next. If you live in Arizona or you live in California in the United States, you are probably very familiar with this fungus. And this is a tweet the other day from the California Department of Health. And they're saying cases of valley fever, this is a fungal infection, have nearly tripled from 2015 to 2019 in California. So what is valley fever? Let's take a look at that. It's caused by a fungus called Coccidioides immitis. Valley fever is also called coccidioidomycosis. And this fungus is normally found in the soil and the dirt, particularly of the Southwest. And you'll hear about it sometimes in when like Arizona gets a big massive dust storm or something like that. You find out that there's a whole bunch of infections because of that, because the spores are flying around and people are inhaling it. So the big thing with California is they say on their website, since 2000, the number of cases has increased from less than 1,000 cases to more than 9,000 cases in 2019 on an annual basis. That's a huge increase. The fungus infects the lungs and the respiratory system, cause respiratory illness, cough, difficulty in breathing, fever, fatigue. It can sometimes disseminate and affect other parts of the body, and it can be fatal. It can be fatal. So say about each year, California, I'm not even talking about Arizona. Arizona accounts for 65% of all the cases in the country every year. California is next with 30 something percent. But California reports about 1,000 people hospitalized every year and about 80 fatalities. And there was actually an interesting story that I covered recently where, because this can infect animals too, where rescue dogs from Arizona were sick when they were taken to New Hampshire, and it was detected that they had valley fever, a coccidioides infection. So, yeah, interesting disease. I'm going over some things that a lot of people aren't aware of. If you're a microbiology geek, right, you probably know, but lay people may not know of some of these diseases. If I'm in Florida, valley fever is the furthest thing from my mind. So in California itself, they say about most cases are about 65% of the cases in California are from the Central Valley and the Central Coast regions. So not familiar with that, but if you know California, leave me a comment. Let me know what it's like, especially during these summer months. All right, let me go ahead and move on to the next the next disease, and this is a mosquito-borne virus I'm going to talk about next, and it is not one of the most common ones. It's not like a West Nile or of course, West Nile is the biggest mosquito-borne virus in the United States. This we see a handful of cases on an annual basis, but we can see them more frequently, and there's the thunder, more frequently as the years go on. And that is Jamestown Canyon Virus. And there was an interesting story that came out of New Hampshire just in the past week or so. There we go. Let me bring that up. Hopefully you can see it. This is from the New Hampshire Department of Health. And they say, this was from August 6th, they were announcing that an adult from Dublin, New Hampshire, tested positive for Jamestown Canyon Virus, a viral infection transmitted through the bite of an infected mosquito. This is the first detection of Jamestown Canyon Virus in the state this season. I think last year they had about 5 cases. The person, and this is why I wanted to really talk about it, because you don't see this every day. The person infected with the Jamestown Canyon Virus was hospitalized with worsening neurological symptoms and ultimately died. Jamestown Canyon Virus was identified as a contributing cause to their death. I'm going to drink a water real quick. And this, of course, is a mosquito-borne virus that circulates in North America. We find it in a lot of mosquito pools across the country, and it primarily circulates between deer and mosquitoes, but humans do get infected also. Typically, people do not develop symptoms. So this is a neurological case is, I wouldn't say unusual, but it's not the norm. Or they develop very mild symptoms for all three, or develop all very mild symptoms. Early symptoms can include fever, muscle aches, headaches, fatigue, very nonspecific symptoms. Serious CNS disease can include meningitis or encephalitis. And obviously, in this case, there are some fatal infections. I don't know, has anybody heard of Jamestown Canyon Virus before? Miranda's got a comment on YouTube. She says, I think it's more common than we know, underdiagnosed. Yeah, that's probably very true. Very, very true. Just to give you a snapshot of Jamestown Canyon Virus and how it is seen as far as infections across the United States in the past decade or so. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, so in 2010, there were no cases, but as you can see, it starts picking up around 2017. We're seeing like 58, 75 cases, and we started seeing some fatalities. So there's 225 cases reported in the past decade. If you can see that in the bottom right-hand corner, and 2% of them were fatal. 5 cases total were fatal, and they were all neurological, neuroinvasive disease. So it's possible. It's not nearly as, I don't know, deadly as Eastern equine encephalitis, where you see a death rate of up to 30%. I mean, that's some hardcore stuff. But there is a danger to this. And again, just like with Naegleria, we talked about earlier, we're in the summertime part of the year, warm weather. Well, it's mosquito season too, and this is something you got to be cautious of. This is a potentially, I stress it, potentially fatal disease. All right. Anybody got any good comments about mosquito-borne viruses or Jamestown Canyon? West Nile, Eastern equine. We did see an Eastern equine infection, the first human infection that I noticed this year out of Georgia about a week or two ago, and that was a fatal infection also. So, yeah, it's that time. I'm down in Florida. There hasn't been any human West Nile yet, no human Eastern equine, but there's been quite a few horses that have been positive for Eastern equine. And we haven't seen any locally transmitted dengue or chikungunya or Zika yet. So keeping our fingers crossed on that. Because mosquitoes are the state's pet. There's so many mosquitoes down here. All right. Well, let me move on to another story. And you may have saw this out of the MMWR on August 6th, last Friday. And it was a pretty fascinating story. And if you're a microbiologist, I'm going to have a question for you at the end. Let me go ahead and bring up the MMWR real quick. All right, there we go. And very interesting case. It was a notes from the field on the CDC MMWR. Delays in identification and treatment of a case of septicemic plague in Navajo County, Arizona last year. And let me go through some of the details just to give you a feel for it if you're not familiar with it. It says on June 18th, 2020, a white non-Hispanic man aged 67 sought care at an emergency room in Navajo County, Arizona, complaining of dehydration, nausea, weakness, and a chronic cough of 1.5 years duration. He arrived in Navajo County from Nebraska about 9 days earlier. They did a physical exam. All the chest x-rays and CT were normal. He returned to the emergency room the next day. It was June last year for treatment of 3 red, painful, suspected insect bites on his leg, discharged with a diagnosis of cellulitis, and was given 2 scripts for different antibiotics. He returned the next day to the ER, complaining of fever, dizziness, productive worsening cough, swollen glands. But they didn't note where the location of these swollen glands were. Weakness and chills. He was hospitalized, received treatment with 4 antibiotics for a presumptive diagnosis of sepsis. He was tested for COVID because we have so many of the diseases, the non-specific symptoms are all overlapping, right? So he was COVID negative. And this is where it really gets interesting. On June 24th, the hospital laboratory reported an atypical gram-negative isolate from a blood specimen, which was sent that day to a commercial reference lab for further ID using MALDI-TOF. And if you work in a micro lab, you are probably familiar with MALDI-TOF. That's the matrix assisted laser desorption ionization time of flight mass spec. Very common instrumentation now in clinical labs. However, the MALDI-TOF in this case identified the organism as Yersinia pseudotuberculosis, which is a gram-negative rod, and reported that to the hospital. The patient was discharged from a hospital on July 1st with a peripherally inserted central cath line and 3 additional days of 14-day course of IV vancomycin. On July 10th, the hospital laboratory sent a blood culture to the Arizona State Department of Health lab, and Yersinia pestis, the Asian plague, was presumptively identified, and it was later confirmed a couple days later by RT-PCR, and then the patient was put on the appropriate antibiotic course of oral doxycycline for 10 days. So, interesting. So the misdiagnosis was attributed to the laboratory identification system. So I guess my question is, if you work on a microbiology lab, do you see this kind of stuff with the MALDI-TOF very often? I worked with it for a couple 2.5 years when I worked for the state lab here in Florida, and didn't have really many problems with it at all. It's really good for the the straightforward organisms, but right, we don't see Yersinia pestis every day. Um, so, anybody have any stories about the Maldi toff and situations that may have happened um, while using it? Because no ID system is perfect. I can remember years ago, before I'm dating myself, but when the lab I was working in, the primary identification system for gram-negative rods was the API strip. That takes you back. And I remember one time did an API strip and I got a Yersinia pestis on it, and I was like flipping out. I'm like, oh my god! And sent the strain to the state public health lab, and it came back as E. coli. So none of these things are perfect, but clearly it did freak me out. Anyway, so I think the guy's very fortunate. So he was walking around with septicemic plague, right? There's 3 types of plague, right? There's bubonic, where you get the infection and it produces bobos in your lymph nodes. What's the other one? Inhalation. Pneumonic plague, which is probably the most dangerous one, and that's the only form of plague that can be transmitted person to person. And of course, septicemic, where it gets in the bloodstream. So he was given different antibiotics. He was given vancomycin, which I don't think there's much use. Vancomycin has much use against the plague, but I don't know. I guess he's pretty lucky that he actually survived it. He was given they don't describe all the different antibiotics he was put on, so maybe he was given something to slow it down or whatever. But yeah, interesting story. Very interesting case. Don't see that all the time. All right, and I want to go ahead and close out with one last story, which I thought was fascinating. And this one does have to do with COVID. I'm trying not to talk about COVID too much because everybody else on the planet is talking about COVID, and I want to expose people to other things that are going on in the world. And if you check out the Outbreak, I got the little banner going on down there, the website, excuse me, outbreaknewstoday.com. You'll see that I try to cover all kinds of outbreaks, cases, research, or whatever that's going on, because there's a lot of stuff going on out there, and a lot of it's being missed because COVID is gobbling up the news space. So let me whip over to this story, and this is very, very interesting also. And I hope you're enjoying this, and hopefully you think the stories that I'm talking about are pretty interesting. And I think this one definitely is. And let me take you back about a week or so. And the headlines all over Washington Post, New York Times. I can't remember which one got the PowerPoint first. It was a CDC PowerPoint was leaked. And apparently on the CDC PowerPoint, it said that the Delta variant is as contagious as chickenpox. Yeah, of course. I had some questions of that. I mean, when you think of chickenpox, that's clearly one of the most contagious diseases out there, viruses. And yeah, anyway, I mean, you had to take it at face value. But if you never read the blog Goats and Soda on NPR, they do a fantastic job, and this story is really, really good. And let me go ahead and put it in full screen so you can check it out. All right. So they say in a leaked report, the CDC scroll it down so you guys can read along with me. The CDC made a surprising claim about the Delta variant of the coronavirus. It is as transmissible as chickenpox, the agency wrote in a slideshow presentation leaked to the Washington Post on July 26th. Chickenpox is one of the most contagious viruses known. Each individual can spread the virus to as many as 90% of people close to that person, the CDC reports. So is the Delta variant that contagious as well? Well, the short answer is no, says evolutionary biologist and biostatistician Tom Wenceliers of the University of Leuven in Belgium. And this is a fantastic chart right here. And I really wanted to share this with you. Hopefully you can see this well. And this is demonstrating the R naught of some of the common viruses that we hear about. And the R naught is basically how many people, if one person is infected with that particular organism, in this case viruses, if they're around a bunch of people that are vulnerable to the disease, how many people will get infected from one person? And as you can see on this chart, the R naught in the lower left hand, the R naught for the 1918 flu, for Ebola is 2 people. For the original COVID strain, it's 3. Then if you go next to that, the Delta strain, this essentially doubled the transmissibility of the original COVID strain. But then you see chickenpox at 10 people. So one person can infect 10 unvaccinated or vulnerable people. And it goes on. And I've seen some people say that it's transmissible as measles. Well, no. I mean, measles is by far is the most contagious virus out there. Mumps is 12 people and measles is 18. So if you have a person with measles, 18 people will get infected if they're not vaccinated and they're vulnerable or they never had the disease before. Anyway, he goes on to say, yeah, I didn't find the CDC statement entirely accurate, says Wenceliers, who was one of the first scientists to formally calculate the transmission advantage of the Alpha and Delta variants over the original SARS-CoV-2. Nonetheless, and this is true, Delta is highly transmissible. It's probably the most contagious respiratory virus that we know for the moment. Here's why, and it goes on to explain. When scientists measure a virus's transmissibility, they often use what is known as RO, or the R naught. It is the number of people a sick person will infect when the entire population is vulnerable to the virus. So it's the virus's potential of spreading, given ideal conditions for the virus, that when no one has any immunity, says computational biologist Karthik Gangavarapu at Scripps. So, for example, the flu has an RO of 2. Each person infected with the flu passes the virus on to 2 people. I kind of already described that, and many of you probably already know that. Chickenpox, on the other hand, is way more contagious. So each person with chickenpox infects about 10 other people on average. Outbreaks are explosive, and we see that. And particularly before 1995, prior to the vaccine, the chickenpox vaccine, you would see this quite a bit. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting that people, did actual research on this to show that, yes, the Delta virus is very transmissible, but it is not chickenpox transmissible. Anyway, interesting stuff. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any topics you would like me to bring up next week, you can shoot me an email, outbreaknews1@gmail.com, or contact me on YouTube or on Facebook if that's where you're watching from. And let's see, what's this? Anna Miranda on YouTube says, "Could this be Lyme family?" I'm not sure, Anna, which organism you're talking about. I missed that when you put it up. Maybe you were talking about when I was talking about Jamestown Canyon. Jamestown Canyon is a virus. Lyme is a bacteria. But yes, they're both transmitted by insect vectors, one a tick, one a mosquito. Anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I appreciate you watching. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and comment below. Like the channel, subscribe to the channel. Share it with your friends. If you're on Facebook, comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know where you're from. Anything. I just let me know what's going on. Let me know what kind of topics you'd be interested in. I'd be glad to include that in next week's show. Okay, I appreciate it. And I'll see you next week. Bye.